and welcome to this episode of No Time to Care Soundbite. My name is Charles Kunkel. I am your host. Today, I am very excited about my guest. His name is Joop Breuer, and he is a registered nurse from a country across the Atlantic Ocean, the Netherlands. Very excited to talk about Joop today, about the differences between our countries in terms of a number of topics. Joop has been a nurse since 1980, been a bedside nurse. He's been in leadership roles as well as an educator. Joop was one of the very first people to be a part of the Emergency Nurse Association's International Advisory Council. So please help me welcome my friend, Joop. How are you, Joop?
I'm fine. Thanks, Charles, for this welcome. I'm fine.
Good.
Thank you.
The first thing I said to Joop when we did our pre-meeting today was that I just absolutely love that background. I mean, the tulips are so representative of your country, but I just love it. You look like it just reminds me of, what was it, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You just look like in a giant field of tulips.
But being on Zoom quite a bit lately with all meetings and things like that, I'm kind of bored of my background, boring things. So I thought I'd try something else today. So,
well, I love it. I love it. It's perfect. It's perfect for this webcast. So, well, first of all, like I said, obviously there are differences between healthcare in your country and our country. So I'd just like to get your input, because I know you've spent some time here in the United States as being a part of the Emergency Nurse Association. I know you sit on the board for them. And so I'd just like to get your feedback, your thoughts about what are the major differences between healthcare in your country versus this country?
well, I think that the biggest difference is that we got healthcare for all. So everybody in the Netherlands is insured for their healthcare costs. And I think that's a good thing, because I think having a good healthcare system and having access to it, it's one of the basic, well, almost a human right, because how can you have say you're a civilized country and have people not having access to healthcare? So I think it's very important to have universal healthcare coverage, and I'm very proud of it. And of course, all my friends in the States say, well, that must cost you heaps of money. And that's not entirely true, to be honest. I did some research, and I just throw it in to make it clear. The percentage of the GDP of the USA, which is spent on healthcare, is about 17%. We in the Netherlands only spend 10% of our GDP on healthcare. So that's, quite a big difference. Well, another thing is in healthcare, we have a perfect, what we call first line of healthcare, with primary care providers, family doctors, and they do an excellent job, and they cost the healthcare system considerably less than when everybody goes to the ED. And so we focus on primary healthcare, especially for families with children and families, to go to a primary healthcare provider first, and only get referred to the hospital, to the ED, when the primary healthcare provider can solve it. So we don't see a lot of things like small ear infections, small things like that in our EDs. They all are covered by the GDP.
So you make an interesting point. You talk about the GDP and the percentage of the total GDP for coverage of healthcare, and yours is much lower. Now, a skeptic may say, well, it's lower because if you don't spend as much, then the quality of that care isn't as good. How would you answer somebody that would say something like that?
Well, I don't agree with that, because at the statistics of the World Healthcare Organization, they publicize every year a country with the best healthcare, and just like the lowest is in Afghanistan and the best is in Norway, but we always in the top three, and the US is about, well, not to be too picky, around 10 or 11. So our healthcare is very good.
Not to be too picky. I like not to be too picky, but you had the exact number of where we are. Listen, I don't think anybody's going to debate, that there are challenges in the American healthcare system, certainly. And there's probably a pretty good divide between the number of people that look at universal health care as something that is a right to any citizen, and some that would say that, you know what, the healthcare, is a higher quality because it is not a universal healthcare system. I cannot tell you, I disagree with that. I mean, there are a number of countries, Canada, France, Netherlands, that have universal healthcare, and it truly works. And you're right. I mean, the fact is that you have you have all of your citizens that are actually receiving care, which I think ultimately in the end, if you have somebody who's not receiving care because they can't afford it, well, those people eventually will enter into the system. They just enter into the system when they're much sicker.
Yeah, and too late. And then you need more resources to get them better. And well, another difference is our healthcare system is not as commercialized as the US system because just until last year, hospitals were not allowed to make any profit. So our hospitals are not profit, are all sort of non-profit organizations. Everything they earn has to go back into the hospital. We don't have hospitals with shareholders like the big companies you have over in the States. Well, I think that's a good thing because, um, well, yeah, I might seem like a leftist liberal from Europe saying this, but I don't think healthcare is something you should make money, make huge profits from. You know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It's a,
Yeah. So
it's
I
a
have a
basic.
I have a question because one of the things that I heard I've had these conversations before. One of the things that they talk about is that salaries are less, that nurses in the Netherlands or countries that have universal health care don't make as much. And look, most of us got into healthcare because we like caring for people. I mean, it is a humanistic instinct within us to care for human beings, but it's also a job that pays very well in the United States. I think pays very well in the United States compared to many people who get out of college and struggle in the first few years. I mean, nurses get paid pretty well. Is there that much of a discrepancy in terms of salaries here in the United States versus in a universal healthcare system?
No, it's not that much. If you look at what we get per month, I'm quite open about that I work 32 hours a week, so it's not a full-time position because I do a lot of other things, and I get about 3,300 euros a month, which is about let me calculate, $3,600.
Okay.
But my healthcare insurance is almost completely covered by that. My pension plan is covered in that. So that's
That's a good point. While the difference in salaries may be, a good portion, you're right.
mhm,
I mean, how much does it cost for me to pay? I had this, if I have, I had a medical issue, and
mhm,
I struggled to find somebody who would take my insurance. And then on top of that, once I went to that person, I got two bills. I got a bill from the actual hospital itself, and then I got a bill from the physician group. And that physician group, I was like, well, wait a second, you're part of the hospital, but in reality, they're not. They're separated. They're run by an individual group. And so, I was told that the test would cost $212, which I was okay with. So I paid for that because it wasn't covered under the. I received a calcium channel score, CAT scan, to predict cardiac disease because I have genetic history, and $212. Okay, I can pay that. So I paid that, no problem. Then I got a bill for $100 for a physician to read it, and so. There's a lot of hidden cost in U.S. healthcare, and I think that that's one of the challenges that we face. At least that your retirement, your pension is covered, that your health care is covered, and then the money that you actually receive in your salary is actually your money.
and I don't need a liability insurance because my hospital pays for that as well. And that's another big difference. We don't have the huge claims like you read about in the US. I just did some research, and the biggest amount of money which has been compensated to a patient in the Netherlands, 200,000 euros. It's about 250,000 dollars for somebody who got by accident got his wrong leg amputated. So more or less brings it in perspective how much, well, if you look at the huge amount of liability claims you see in the States, we don't have that over here. So and that brings along the cost of liability insurance for doctors and things. It's not as big as it's not as high as in the States. So
It plays a big role in how much medical insurance costs. Yeah, all of the litigation that occurs because of malpractice or malpractice suits. Yeah, that all adds into it, and so that is
and
certain.
and from that also derives that we have. Well, we are very. We don't do a CAT scan on everyone. We don't. We just do a CAT scan if we think it's possible, it is necessary, but not if, to avoid any compensation claims or things like that. That's also a big difference.
Oh yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, the big change here in the United States is when we started to change our insurance in terms of we used to order studies for the sake that the studies the studies that we would order or the diagnostic tests that we would order would produce revenue. And so
Mm-hmm.
now, all of our payments are bundled. And so if you need to get the care done in the least expensive way, but that still hasn't stopped us. I do think that we overutilize tests because of that fear of litigation. And so
Mm-hmm.
if that fear is reduced, I could see definitely the difference in the amount of money that healthcare costs.
Yeah, I think so. So,
Totally makes
well, our
sense.
system isn't perfect, but I think it's a very good system.
So, in terms of looking at healthcare now, because it's a universal healthcare system, are there, again, another myth that I want to talk about is the amount of time people must wait to have a test done because it's universal healthcare and because everybody has it. Oftentimes people believe that if say you need bypass surgery, I mean, it's not an emergent issue, you need bypass surgery, that the period of time that you need to wait between the time that you're diagnosed to the time that you get it is extended. Any truth
No,
to that?
no, it's not that much. I think for bypass surgery, it's about a waiting time. If it's not life-threatening your condition, about 3 to 4 weeks, I think, in the moment. But we do have like some areas where there are prolonged times
Mhm.
of, for, you have to wait for, especially for orthopedic surgery. You have a shortage of orthopedic surgeons, I
Okay.
think. But we see some private hospitals jump into that, and you can go to them, and your healthcare insurance pays for that as well. If you need that hip replacement within a month or so, you can go there.
So you make a good point. Hold on a second, because you just said private hospitals. So in the Netherlands, you have both the universal healthcare system, and then there are also private hospitals as well.
But just they're more focused. Like we have orthopedic and
Oh, they're
plastic
specialty hospitals.
hospitals. So
I
if you
understand. Are specialty hospitals in that universal healthcare, or are specialty hospitals pay out of pocket?
no, they're in the healthcare system.
They're in the healthcare system. Okay. All right. Well, that totally makes sense. So from an opportunity perspective for nursing in terms of, how often in your country do nurses often choose, is there a lot of ability to be able to move from the thing that this is what happens to me when all these questions go through my mind. I get so excited. So in this country, one of the things that I preach about that's wonderful about nursing all the time is the fact that if you get tired of one thing, you can do another. If you're tired of OB nursing, you can be an ED nurse. If you're tired of ED nursing, you can become a teacher. If you're tired of being a teacher, you can become a business on the business side. You can become an entrepreneur. You can become a scientist, a researcher. There's so many things that you can do. Are those opportunities the same in your country?
Yeah, I think so. You can switch fairly easy, and especially nowadays when we do have a shortage in nursing, so you can do you can do and work everywhere you want, more or less. There's some areas like ICU and ED, which experience huge difference shortages at the moment. So you can work there everywhere, and that's because our salaries are a bit lower compared to what you if you go into banking or into IT. You earn a lot of more money, but we do have like nurses who go to work outside the hospital, but they get hired by the hospital. Like you got system as well. You got private companies who send out those nurses to hospitals who got shortages. They earn a little bit more, and you can do that if you want to. But I don't like that because you 1 month you work in one hospital, 1 month you work in another hospital. And I always like to be a part of a team of nurses and team of colleagues.
So it's almost like travel nurses in the United States. We have agency nurses, travel nurses who get paid more money in order to have the flexibility to go to different hospitals over certain periods of time. Same thing?
Yeah, same thing.
Okay.
And I think that's a good development because what you see, besides nursing, every staff nurse in my hospital and every other place, different other tasks on the side, like developing protocols, developing standards, taking care of student nurses. And those travel nurses don't do that. They just come in, do their job, and go out again.
Sure. Yeah, there's no ownership, right? One of the challenges of building a work culture is that you need to be able to have people who feel as though they're owners of their environment. And a lot of times you have traveling nurses, and it's not their fault. They're not bad people. It's just they're renters. They're renters. They come in, they rent the space, they do their job, and then they leave. And so, yeah, it's really a challenge to build a culture when your hospital is so reliant on traveling nursing, which is interesting because that's starting to become a big issue here in the United States. We talk a little bit about the nursing shortage, and the World Health Organization has mentioned that by 2025, the world will see a nursing shortage of about 9 million nurses. In our country, United States, the prediction is 1.3 million nurses short by that time. Now, that prediction was done prior to the pandemic. But my thought is that with this pandemic, I think that a lot of social issues that we're seeing, a lot of, the challenges that when you go to work every day and you put your life on the line to care for people who actually have COVID, and then you see many, many people walking around without masks, ignoring social distancing, it's almost what's the point? And I think that goal, that timeline of 2025 of us seeing that shortage, I think that's going to happen a lot sooner. Are you seeing that in your country?
Yeah, I think so because, like you said, well, a lot of nurses, especially on specialized wards like ICU and ED, are kind of well, they feel exhausted after all that extra work they've done in the past months during the start of the pandemic. We worked double hours and things like that. And now they're all so tired, and the second wave is probably coming sooner than later to my country. So we worry about that because I just read an article about one of the biggest ICUs in our country, in one of the teaching hospitals on the east side. There were 25 ICU nurses who quit it because they didn't want to go through the COVID
Oh,
pandemic.
did you say 25?
Yeah, 25.
Wow.
So that's quite a lot. And I think, well, policymakers don't realize that what nurses did during the pandemic. And of course, we saw a huge outpour of support, people applauding and bringing us food and things like that, and calling us heroes, calling us angels. Well, I don't like that because I think it's part of our job, taking care of those people. And we do it well because we choose and we're well educated. We're not heroes, we're not angels. We just do our job, but it's very difficult circumstance.
Well, I think, I think that though, a lot of people appreciate the idea that yes, we are doing our jobs, but it's not off, it's there. I don't think there's ever been a time, at least in my lifetime or my nursing career, where you thought that when I walked into the emergency department, I could truly catch a disease that could be fatal. that we had the small period of time where we had Ebola, we had H1N1 swine flu that came through,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. But I don't know if I've ever been through a time where it was constantly on the mind of a provider. And I think that's part of where that exhaustion is coming from, because when you have to think about each step as you do it. Don't touch your face, take off the PP in the right way, make sure you wash your hands. That in itself is a constant just thought process that can be exhausting in its own right, let alone being in PPE for 12 hours a day. Um, there's a lot of physical and mental exhaustion, I think, is happening now, and it is focused more on the idea that COVID is a disease that could be fatal.
Yeah. But we don't 12 do, we hardly do any 12-hour shifts. We only do
Oh,
8 hours.
okay.
So that's, and I think that's a good thing, because if you look at all the literature about that, about making errors during a shift, in the last 2 to 3 hours of the 12-hour shift, the most errors are made. So
That is a great point, and it is the balance of you know putting in your 12 hours and having more time for yourself versus the balance of doing more days during the week, but being able to provide safer nursing care. Because I think you're right. I think, after 8 hours, 10 hours, and I know there have been multiple studies on it, your brain starts to go into that sort of processing mode where you're getting the task done, you're falling behind, and so in that realm that you tend to make more mistakes. And so, no, I agree with you that is a big challenge.
we always say you work on your, what's Dutch expression, you work on your spinal cord, and that's when you start to make different mistakes. So I just saw a part of a movie which ENA is producing. It's called In Case of Emergency. Oh, there's a very touching scene about a nurse who comes home and is exhausted after 12 hours
Mhm.
on a COVID ward, puts on her scrubs outside and things like that. And we don't take our scrubs home. We get scrubs supplied by the hospital. So
No, I've seen, there have been a number of videos that have come through, and where people, say goodbye to their kids on the outside of the door. I know one person that actually, in the beginning of this pandemic, they lived in a little trailer outside of the house. They didn't go into the house. And yeah, I mean, that alone, I mean, the social isolation when you're in that PP, you feel socially isolated from your patients as well. That all that garb on, all the PPE, and you're separating yourself from the human being that's sitting in that bed. And yeah, I mean, I think, we talk about physical exhaustion, we talk about mental exhaustion, but then there's emotional exhaustion, right? um,
so
there are times that when you have so many sick people that you're trying to balance that, and there's something called moral injury, where you feel as though you're morally obligated to care for all these people, but you're physically unable to do that. So you have that real clash between the two, and that's a challenge.
being in PPE, you can't be the same nurse as being in just without PPE. If you got a patient who's very sick and you're in PPE, you can't communicate with, in touch with them like the way you used to do without PPE. I think it's very important, not the non-verbal communication, the touching, the things like that. And you can't do that wearing PPE.
Well, I tell you, one of the good things that came out of this, and this is the one of the main reasons I'm very, very proud to be a nurse, and that is that when nurses find a problem, boy, they find solutions to it. I mean, the amount of innovation that has come out of this whole pandemic has been fascinating. There are just multiple problems that we have solved because nurses are great thinkers. They're critical thinkers. They're able to think outside of the box and find ways to be able to deliver care that was never thought of before, because we've never had a pandemic. And so, nurses as innovators, I mean, truly are inspiring when I look at our profession.
Yeah, I agree completely, because, well, that's what makes nurses unique, our way to solve problems and things like that. So important.
So Juba, I want to ask you about something and change topics a little bit, and that is, both we're both males in a female-dominated profession.
Mm.
It's never really been an issue for me. But I think that one of the things that I'm constantly being asked about is why didn't I become a doctor? I hear that all the time. Why didn't you go to become a doctor? Or I walk into a room and they think that I am the doctor.
Mm.
What that that in Europe or in the Netherlands where you are, is that a dynamic that occurs?
Yeah, I can completely say yes to that. I get well. I'm working in nurse for 4 years now. The number of times I get asked, why didn't you go to med school, or couldn't you go to med school? On the outside, oh, were you too stupid to go to med school? You know what I mean?
That's what they think about us sometimes. Like, well, you're not smart enough. No, I made a choice. I want to be a nurse. See, look, I think physicians are great people. Don't get me wrong. But if you become a cardiologist, you have to be a cardiologist. Now you can, step outside and do business or do leadership. Yes, but I always thought that nursing gave me so many other opportunities to do so many other things. And so, I mean, that's why I chose it. It doesn't mean I'm not smart. Yeah, that always frustrated me when people said that to me.
That's true. I always get so angry well, it doesn't happen lately, but you remember that when you come into a room with a colleague and the patient calls you doctor or calls my colleague doctor, and my colleague says, "No, I'm only a nurse." I get so. You're not only a nurse, you're a nurse. You got your own skills, you got your own education, you got your own quality.
You feel like grabbing them, shaking them, slapping them around a little bit? You're a nurse, and be proud of it.
Yes, be proud of it because we're highly trained professionals. And because what would healthcare look like if there were no nurses? Remember that.
Yeah. It's funny because when I first decided to become a nurse, I was a criminal justice major in college, and I was a criminal justice major all the way up till I was a junior. So I only had one more year of school left, and I remember making decision to become a nurse. Now, when I became a nurse back in the '80s, there weren't very many men, and so the other stereotype was that all men that were in nursing were gay. And it was just, it didn't bother me at all. It was just a fact. And so I remember that originally I wanted to be an OBGYN nurse. That's because I thought that I was worried about becoming a nurse and worried about taking care of people dying and all that stuff. And I thought it would be sad. And so I said to myself, you know what? I want to be a nurse, an OBGYN nurse. I mean, babies, people having babies. That's nice. That's a beautiful thing. And so I remember the very first time I was on my clinical in school, and I was assigned a room, and I was asked to go feel for the fundus and look at the lochia. And I walked in, I identified myself. My name's Charles. I'm a nurse here. I'm from Penn State, and I'm a nurse. I said, I want to feel your fundus and look at your lochia. And she looked at me and said, you will not be looking at anything. You need to go get me a female nurse. And at that point I questioned, I said, geez, is this the right profession for me? But sure enough, that was not the norm. That was not what happened to me all the time. And in today's healthcare, I mean, there are many male nurses, and I think that there's no difference, and people don't look at it any differently.
No, not the same in my country. We only come across that, well, occasionally, because we have got a huge population from migrants from the Mediterranean, from Turkey, from Morocco, and those elderly women sometimes feel very uneasy by being treated by a male nurse. And I said, it's okay, I'll send you a female colleague, I don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you.
If you got the possibility to take that into account, you should do that.
Yeah, well, and one of the things about being a good nurse is understanding cultural sensitivities, right? Understanding that there are oftentimes, especially with student nurses, I often have to remind them that when you walk into a room and you ask something of a female in the bed, and the male answers you and keeps answering the questions, don't see that as a negative. That may be the culture. And some cultures, that's the way that it works. We need to understand other cultures. If we're able to provide the best nursing possible, we need to understand that cultures are different. It doesn't make them wrong. We need to understand it.
Yep, I'm completely agree. That's
So
what.
you're an ER nurse, okay? And so everybody has their favorite ER nursing story. Do you have any stories or things that have happened to you over your career that's a funny story or a heartwarming story or something where you think to yourself, this is something that I'm gonna tell people for a long time.
Oh yeah, there's one story I always tell to my American friends is a couple of years ago we had an American couple coming in. They were doing a bicycle tour of the Netherlands, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, she got on the bike and she broke her ankle, and they came in by ambulance and they were sitting. The first thing they asked me for, well, can you bring me a tuna sandwich? So it's always talk about the sandwich thing, and we don't provide sandwiches. We just give them a cup of coffee or something. But first thing they asked was, "Can I get a tuna sandwich?" Before anything else, they asked. And well, being an ED nurse is, well, I think it's special because you're there with people who, well, probably didn't even know an hour before they were brought into the ED. So that's very special, and you're there in times of their biggest concern. And that's, well, I remember one night it was a crazy night. You know those nights when people, ambulance start pouring in, and well, we had a young lady about 34 years. She died of later. She had a huge pulmonary embolism, and we worked on her, and we didn't save her. And we were all very sad. And then I was called by the registration desk. You have to come now. So I came, and there was a woman about the same age, 34, and she was in full labor. So one moment I was taking care of a woman of 34 who died. And the other moment I just brought in the lady and grabbed hold of the newborn baby. And it's that's so exemplary for my job, I think. From very sad to very, very, very dear, very good. I think that's so exemplary for your job as an ED nurse. And you don't get that anywhere else.
Yeah, you know what? That is a great story because that really epitomizes what emergency nursing is like. One minute you can be helping somebody peacefully pass away because of some illness or some injury, and then walk into the next room and help bring a life into this world.
Mhm.
And it is. I think it is it's probably the most the biggest reason why I became an emergency department nurse, because you have to know a little bit about every single thing there is. You need to know a little bit about GYN. You need to know a little bit about GU, GI, a little bit about cardiology. You need to know a little bit about psych. All of those things come into play during your 12-hour shift. And so you really have to be a master of all of that. And yeah, that's a great story to relate to, why it's so awesome to be a nurse.
And I became an ED nurse. Of course, I thought, well, after my nursing school, I want to be an ICU nurse. That's it. All the high-tech machine, that's it. And I did my ICU training. I worked on ICU, and it was awesome. All the machines and the respirators and the things like that, and it
Mhm.
was great. And then they asked me for, oh well, my hospital was kind of short on nurses for the ED during summer because they had a shortage, and nurses had to go. Do you want to go for about a 3 weeks rotation? I don't think ED is something for me. I don't. It's too superficial. You don't dive into things like we do on the ED, like sitting with a patient for all day, do a bit on the respirator, do a bit on the medication. You know what I mean? And when I was there after one day, I was so I never went back to the ICU. But
You were hooked.
yeah, I was hooked completely.
That's awesome.
And also because just before I did the rotation, I I took care of the ICU of a very good friend of mine who got a big surgery and who got complicated and who died. And that's very Well, been very stressful for me. Yeah. So I think the rotation just came out. It was not a good time when I was open for it. I never went back to the ICU again.
Yeah. It, you know, I was a telemetry nurse when I first got out of school, because when I first graduated from school, they did not take new nurses in the emergency department. They felt as though you needed experience, and I totally understood that. It's changed since then. I think that we've been able to provide great education, a great mentorship, great orientation, so that people can become emergency department nurses and succeed. But back then, I became a telemetry nurse, and I learned organizational skills, and I learned, the interpersonal touch, because when you're with somebody for an entire shift, it's a lot different than when you're with somebody for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different mindset, but the skills are the same. The human skills are the same for empathy and compassion and those kind of things. And so with that being said, I made that switch just like you a long time ago, and I never looked back. There was a small period in the middle of my career where I became an ICU nurse, but that was only because I wanted to become a flight nurse. And I knew that in order to become a flight nurse, I was going to need some of those ICU skills. So I converted. But then after I was done, I went right back to the emergency department. And that is a love that I have. And that is a love that I will always have. Emergency nursing is the world for me.
Yeah, what we see in the Netherlands nowadays is we have nurses who have a combined job. They work 6 months on ICU and 6 months on the ED, and that's, for some people it's perfect. But for me, I don't want to go back to the ICU. But
ER nurse for life. I love it.
For life, right?
Well, Joop, it was great talking to you. I mean, really, I find it fascinating to talk about the differences between our countries in terms of healthcare. I've learned a lot. I know that you're a member of the Emergency Nurse Association. You sit on the board of directors. That is a key role, especially for a national organization. ENA has done a tremendous amount of work, especially during this pandemic, in order to really help nurses throughout America deal with this process. They're very focused on policy making and influential in Washington, D.C. So I want to thank you for being a part of that group. And I want to thank you for being with me today. It's been an honor to talk to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, Charles. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Okay. Always. And how do you say goodbye in the Netherlands?
Cheech.
What is it?
Tot ziens.
Oh, Cheech. I don't know. Okay. All right. Once again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of No Time to Care Soundbites. Until the next time, my name is Charles Kunkel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Charles. Bye-bye.